have to yell at all of you. So it's great to be here. It's wonderful to see so many faces that I've seen before and so many faces that I haven't seen before. So thank you for coming today. And I hope that you'll all be able to join us afterwards, after we have a little bit of food after the service is over. We will have a special satsang that Lisa, Indra, and myself from Ananda Sangha Worldwide will present news of Ananda throughout the world. You know, I've been on this end, as Daiva mentioned, being a director of different colonies, and it was always a deeply expanding joy to have representatives coming from Ananda Village to really share the news. And that's really what the point is, to share the news of who we are in a broader and much more expanded sense of Ananda. So do join us in the Clarity Room afterwards. I'd like to read to you from Paramahansa Yogananda's book of prayer demands, Whispers from Eternity. Infinite Spirit, thy presence is hidden equally behind the warm rays of the sun and the cool light of the moon. Those lights, though welcome and wonderful, reveal only Mother Nature's splendor to matter. They reveal not thee. To me they therefore darkness. Thy all-revealing, majestic, and supreme light shines not on, but from within, the center of everything, therefore creating no shadows. Shadows in this world reduce light itself to non-light. In theory I have known this. Now, Lord, take all darkness away from me. Wherever I sit with eyes shut, enclosed in my own darkness, cause to blaze upon me in glory the aura of intuition, that suffused in its light I may gaze raptly on thee with worshipping eyes. I think the harmonium had its own intuition when I was playing it, that it seemed to roll on without what I wanted to do, but I think one of the little stops wasn't pulled out enough and I must have bumped it. But it's always an interesting challenge when you're there and suddenly things aren't working the way that you had hoped they would, especially in front of 70 or 80 people. It's like, oh, now what do I do? I kept looking down and thinking magically, come out, come out. But intuition is really, as the reading said, is, well, one way to understand it is, intuition is our normal way of living. It's not the way that we usually live, though. But it is the norm of who we are in consciousness, that intuition is that connection, that we as this expression of consciousness is merged back into pure consciousness. In 1989, Swami Kriyananda asked my wife Parvati and me to move to our community and retreat in Assisi, outside of Assisi, that Ananda had a community and retreat there. And at that time, I still had my Canadian citizenship. Actually, I didn't relinquish it until last year. But, and so after 6 months, I only had a temporary status with the green card, the immigration status. And I had to return after 6 months of being in Assisi to go through the process of the permanent status of the green card. And I had to go alone because we weren't sure. The immigration department wasn't really giving us any time framework, except I had to be back and I hope you'll show up when we tell you to. But there was no sense it was in a week, a month, or 2 months, or 6 months. And so I came back alone. And we had gone up from Assisi to Lugano, which is in the southern part of Switzerland. And then I was going to take a train from there and by myself to Frankfurt and fly back to the States. And for whatever karmic reason, that evening with Parvati, something just came out. It was sort of one of those things that Yogananda talks about, a karmic bomb going off. And I felt a very intense attachment to Parvati. And I was just sobbing. It wasn't like that I thought that would happen. And the next morning I was fine. But whatever happened that evening, it was just an intense karmic thing that that I was leaving Parvati. And it was only going to be at most maybe a few months, so it wasn't a big deal. And I'd spent a lot of time traveling by myself with Ananda, so it wasn't unusual that this was happening. But it just surfaced. And then I came to America. And then I was speaking with Parvati on the phone maybe a week or two after that. She was in Italy. And she said she mentioned to Swami Kriyananda what had happened. And she said what Swami Kriyananda responded with was, it's just attachment. Now what was interesting, my first reactive process went, he doesn't understand, that whole thing of angst, from feeling what he said. And then I sort of paused and was thinking that it was an attachment. He was right dead on. It was clearly an attachment. I mean, no qualms about it. And then I just relaxed and became more centered. And I could feel, I could sense, rather than think, sense this intuitive connection, this intuitive perception, where I heard those words, it's just attachment. Meaning that it's not a big deal. Of course we have attachments. Until we become what's known as jivan muktas, liberated while living, freed while living, there's bound to be desires and attachments. So that's really not the point. And I could feel intuitively that really was the emphasis that Swami Kriyananda gave to me. It's just an attachment. It's no big deal. It's something that you're working on. It's something that will pass as you go into that consciousness more and more completely. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the essence of yoga, the essence of life itself, is given the definition of that yoga is the neutralization of the vortices of feeling. And people confuse this and often will say that they're hearing it as yoga is a neutralization of feelings, but they're missing a significant word there. The vortices, the whirlpools of likes and dislikes, of desires and attachments. And then in the Yoga Sutras, after this amazing concept is presented to us to clarify what indeed our whole role in life is simply to let go of those whirlpools that pull us into delusion. Then Patanjali goes on to describe those whirlpools. They're called vrittis in Sanskrit, and he describes them. And he talks about that there's 5 classifications, and some are less painful, and some are more painful. So it covers pretty much everything in this. Later on, Patanjali goes into more obstacles, but here he's talking about these whirlpools, which is significant. And the first one is, which is very surprising to most people, is that right knowledge is one of those whirlpools. You wouldn't think that, would you? I mean, it's not what we would tune into, that, wait a minute, isn't right knowledge right? So it takes some subtlety to tune into that, and I've read numerous commentaries that have missed the point. But what Patanjali is pointing out, that right knowledge, because he also talks about wrong knowledge certainly being one of the whirlpools, but right knowledge is that even if we get it together with our reason, with our intellect, and have what appears to be the right knowledge, if we allow ourselves to be attached to that right knowledge as if, I know this, what does that signify? It brings the ego context there. I know better than you. That's what it's referring to. The right knowledge where we have layers of, or veils of filters that prevent us from really coming to the core of that experience. But it's an interesting idea that even the good things in life aren't necessarily that good for us in the way that the world sees it. Now, remember in the Festival of Light, which is a ceremony that we'll do at the end of the service, when you hear the bird story, remember the significance of this when you hear the bird story in relationship to what we're talking about here. That in the beginning, God sends the little bird out, the soul out. The bird is representing the soul out into creation. And so that's the mission. The soul's mission is to be there in that divine experience, in that divine expression. And it talks about in the Festival of Light that the gifts are given to expand and multiply the gifts that I have given you, and to enjoy that experience. So it's not as if the experiences of life are being downgraded into being bad. It's really the realization of what that means for us in terms of where our focus is. Are we being driven by those things, or are we able to feel the grace of God flowing through us to experience those things as an extension of the divine? And so this idea that everything that really is in the world can be taken as something to expand and multiply, to be enlivening and producing an enrichment in our experience, or are those experiences driving us? And in the Bhagavad Gita, actually it's not in the Bhagavad Gita, it's in the Mahabharata, which is the great epic that the Bhagavad Gita comes from, that there's that symbolic image of Arjuna with Krishna in the chariot just before the Bhagavad Gita starts. It's on the battlefield, it's surveying the scene of what's happening with the two forces, which of course symbolically, allegorically reflects the battlefield within ourselves, the qualities of either going towards God with the soul qualities or going away from God into delusion, into desires and attachments. But the allegorical symbol here of this image is that Arjuna represents us, of course, the devotee, the everyday devotee, as Yogananda phrased it, or the disciple. And Krishna represents the divine, God. And so they're in the chariot. And Krishna has in his hands the reins that lead to the 5 steeds that are there to drive the chariot. And it's a well-known allegory, if you understand it in its deeper sense. But the 5 steeds represent the senses. So that pull away from that intuitive perception into the mind's intellect and reasoning and restlessness. And so Arjuna has given to Krishna that offering of taking charge. Just like we say in the purification ceremony, the Master says, "Open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life." And that's what Arjuna is doing. He's there in the purification ceremony. He's not kneeling, but he's standing. So, but there it is. He's really given his offering to the Lord to be there with him, controlling these qualities that, in a sense, are going to be, in their own efforts, pulling away from the divine. And so we have this real image that we can take into our daily lives. Because it's only with intuition, as the reading clarified, that we really have that real connection of true knowledge. Otherwise we'll have that more superficial level of even right knowledge as well as wrong knowledge. And so intuition, when you look at it from an intuitive perception, this is sort of a catch-22 here. But what happens for us to open up to intuition is really some simple points. It isn't a mysterious, esoteric thing that intuition is. It's very real and it's very practical. And it's really just the invitation for all of us to bring that into focus and to integrate that. Really, with intuition, the starting point is a steady calmness. When there's emotional ups and downs, when there's the pulls of things going and coming in terms of our own energy, then we won't really have that link to intuition. And, more importantly, we don't have the link to our true home in the divine. We're just sort of orphans at that point, out there without that connection. And so, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali relates in the sutras that happen after the description of these whirlpools, talks about that one of the most significant ways that we overcome those pulls is through steadiness. Because it's that, and one way to describe it is continuous devoted practice. Nice way to say it, isn't it? Because it brings that offering sense. So it's not just doing the things, but that steadiness of tuning in, really allowing ourselves in every moment of our lives in that self-offering, but in a steady rhythm. There's certainly a lot of research on meditation these days that constantly is popping up in articles and scientific digests and things like that. And it's very clear that the evenness of continuous practice, meaning that we have a regularity in meditation. So not only does yoga say it from its perspective, the way that we're designed in our anatomy and with our brains and with our nervous system, it's also saying the same thing, that it's not about having a charge from a really good meditation. It's really that significant. It's really the constancy, that steadiness of allowing ourselves to be bathed in that connective experience. And then clarity. So there's steadiness and calmness. And then there's clarity. That if we start to weed out the things that are cluttering our lives, and I don't mean necessarily the stuff part, the material stuff, I mean more the emotions, the charges of attachments and desires. It's like the image or the illustration that you've probably heard many times, and I'll bother you with it one more time, that it's like this famous sculptor in India that is able to sculpt these beautiful elephants from blocks of marble. And someone asked him, well, how do you do this? I mean, you're just getting a block of marble and you're producing this exquisite sculpture. And he said, it's quite simple. I just chip away that which isn't the elephant. And so clarity is chipping away that which isn't us. It's letting go of the variety of things that happen to us. And again, I think people have a misimpression that can easily come in, probably none of you, but many do, that, well, if I have this clarity and let go of these things, then am I left abandoned? Do I really have much of a real life? Or is it just going to flatten out and I sort of just am existing? Am I numb to life's experiences? Well, the reality is no. And again, even the scientific research substantiates this, that it's only when we come to a real calm energy that's clear with our minds, our awareness, and indeed our physical brain, that we actually don't perceive much. It's easy to be tricked. And we think, no, I'm aware of all this and I can see what's happening, but it's only because you're filtering it from what you have. And if it isn't that clear, your filter is going to be obstructed. It's going to be not as pure as the experiences you can have. So the point is, we're coming home to that pure experience. We're not creating it. We're not going to add it on. It's sort of like, if you wear glasses, that, you go in. I did this the other day at Ananda Village in the office I work in, that when I went to the bathroom, someone had just immediately sprayed some room spray. And I kind of looked up, and of course, it landed on my glasses. And so I didn't think about it and went on, and I kept thinking, gosh, my eyes are a little bit blurry or whatever. But of course, it was just the glasses having these spots from the spray on it. So it wasn't that I was going anywhere to do something. It was something, oh yeah, I need to remove that which is an obstruction, that filters out the clear light. Because, just think, this is the funny thing, right? With, when do you see a window? Only when it's got stuff on it. A window works because you don't see it. Well, it's like that for us, that, we're opening up to that. But it reminds me of this thing when I talk about brain research. I read this collection of, I think it was in Clarity Online magazine from Ananda. They have a humor section to it. And these were actual headlines in the news. And it said, "Lack of brains hinders research." Yeah, so that's it. So lack of our awareness hinders our fulfillment in that way. And so when we look at it that way, that we have this steadiness that we don't have the ups and downs. So even when the ups and downs are certainly going to happen around us. Now, all I can say is that's a guarantee, no matter who you are, that that's going to be what our life is, up and down, external to us. But if we can have that steadiness, that calmness, and that clarity where then we aren't affected by those ups and downs, that we remain in that center, then the last part of it that really makes intuition really a guaranteed part of our lives is that we have joy. That we may feel at times joy may come, but really our approach should be joy is with us. And the logo for Anand is joy is within you. That's, if we tune into that, that is what becomes more and more our reference point. It isn't something as a reference point we're going to. It's a reference point that we are. And with that sense of opening to joy, that joy is within us, the reality of who we are is in that connection with the divine. And that's intuition. That's the experience that we have that then comes into this outer world that we live in. It comes into all the circumstances we're involved in. It is there in our interface with all the people we connect with. It's in everything. So it's not just there. Because, and the thing is, it's, we need to test and work with intuition. That's a given. Because this is the challenging part with intuition, is that it's 100% pure for all of us. But it has a good chance of getting muddied up by the time you think about what you're going to do with that intuition. And that's why the calmness, the clarity, and the joy needs to be there, because it's that intuition may be pure as that connection, and then stuff happens. A little bit of attachment here, a little bit of this here, someone criticizing you, you feel less of that empowerment. All these insecurities come in, your confidence is waning, and they disturb that potential of intuition coming to expression. So always remember your intuition is there complete, but what we're working on is the conduit, ourselves, allowing that coming into every part of our external life as well. And so when we know that, we don't have to worry if someone says, hey, it's an attachment. We don't have to say, well, yeah, I agree, it's an attachment. We can go further and feel in ourselves that direct experience, it's just an attachment. And our freedom is already there, inherent in who we are. It's innate in who we are. And so the joy of that intuition coming into our lives more and more is really, really the joy of God's presence. So let's take a moment to have that presence.
Some men call it progress, down with those who don't. To join the causes others join and shout when others shout. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Some men lack the daring ever to be free. They shun the heights and crowd the depths and court security. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call